Hello. In this video, I want to talk about how to build web applications using the Django framework. And this is a framework I've created to build web applications for data scientists. So the intention of this framework is to build web applications quickly and easily and without any too much of learning about the web application. So it's just to intention is to make it really simple. Um, and it uses Django framework. The reason I use Django framework is because Django uses Python as a background, and it just makes it easier when we build data science applications using Python. That's well integrated into same level of thinking. So those are the two reasons, and this framework is little different from the traditional Django application framework. It is made intentionally easier so that one can build applications much quickly. And the intention of this web application is to demonstrate data science activities to end users. So with that said, let's get started. Before I get started, first thing is I want to talk about the internet, the IP address, the computers, and how do web services work, right? So if you, there are two things in terms of computer networks. This is not a complete guide to computer networking, but a high level overview is not going to hurt, and it just helps to understand how the web services work. Right? When you think of computer networks, there are two things we think about. One is private networks and public networks. When you are, let's say that you are connected at home through your wireless router at home. So let's say that you have a computer that's connected at home, and maybe you also have a mobile application that you connect, right? These are all connected, and when you connect, your local router gives you an IP address that's 10.0.0.10. Let's say you may look up this IP address. If you don't know what this IP address is, it is just a way of addressing each of the computers at home. So when your internal home creates a network something like this, so these addresses are unique and we call them as private networks. And this private network is not accessible to anybody in your neighbor's house. For example, your neighbors may have a same kind of a router, and they may have their router, their computers are connected to their wireless, and they may have the even same address, for example 10.10.0.11 and something like that, right? And these computers cannot access this because these are all private. And there is something else called public network, where you may have a network of computers that are connected to network, and when you have those kinds of networks, these computers are connected, they will have a different kind of an IP address which is different from these local address. So for example, they may have a different address like 10 or something like that. But you just need to know that these are publicly available networks, and when computers have this kind of network, you can connect to those networks using this IP address. But these computers cannot connect to your local home computer because these are all private addressable, and it can only be addressed through your internal network. So this is all you need to know between what is a publicly available computers that's on a public network, and these are the computers that are on a local privately um, connected network. So when you build a web application, or some of the famous servers that you know, um, are not the famous but the publicly accessible servers, they will have a web service running on these machines, and your computers can access to those web servers. That is just the way how the internet works. At the big picture, that's all you need to know about public computers and private networks. Now let me rewrite that private network. That you have a computer, let's just say that it has a IP address which is private IP address that's connected to our local network, and let's say this is a hypothetical Google web server, for example. Right? Let's say that it's working on that way. So when you open up a browser on your computer, when you type in http www.google.com, there are a couple things that happens from your browser. So let me also show you, for example, an example of how things might work. So here, if you type in www.google.com, your browser makes a connection with a publicly available server and gets the data, and then displays this web page. The way how it works at a big picture is, first thing, as soon as you type in www.google.com, your browser will connect to a DNS server, domain name server, and it asks, hey, what is the IP address for www.google.com? This is the first step. And your DNS server, if it knows the address, it gives back the IP address of this machine. For example, 237.0.1.0. That's the second thing. And then your computer will connect to that server through this IP address, right? And in order for this browser to connect to this server will have to run an application, and applications can listen and service on ports. So for example, HTTP server runs on port 80, right? And there are other services, there is FTP and SSH services that runs, which you already might have used them. So the computer will say, hey, I want to connect to 237.0.1. Let's just say 10 at :80, and your application will receive that request. This is the third one. The fourth one would be it will send back a HTML file or a image file or many of those things, and your browser will take it and displays that HTML file on your browser. So if you want to take a look at how the DNS lookup happens in your computer, you may say ns lookup google.com, and then it shows you the IP address like 142.250.239.238, and if you wanted to really, you can actually go back to your browser and you can connect to that port as well, like that. All right. So it changes it back to google.com, and then maybe you can type in 80. It's the same thing. It brings you back the Google page. So that's the mechanics in which how you build a web server or a web application where your browser can connect to it. So now in this set of videos, when you build a Django application, the overhead of bringing in a public IP where you can host the application is little too much. So what you would do, if you have a local IP network, either you can create a web server that I will show you later on one of the machines, for example 11, and then make this web server, make it listen to it on port number 80 or 8000 for example, and then you can use another computer using the browser. You can connect to let's say this IP address, and then it can connect to this machine and then get the response back, and then use that to display your HTML file. And if you don't have additional server, there's one other option that you have. You can take your computer, right, and then you can run a server on your local machine that listens to on port 80, and you can use your browser to connect to your local machine, and then test your applications this way. One special thought is there is a special name called localhost that's used to connect to your own machine. Suppose if your machine has 10.0.0.12 as the IP address, there are two ways to connect to the server. One is through connect to me at 0.0.12 at port number 8000 if it is running at 8000, or you can say connect to my local machine using localhost at 8000. They both will just serve the purpose just fine. Now one thing you to know is when you run a server something like this, only you can test it with your applications. Anybody outside of your network won't be able to access it. But this is just good enough. This will serve the purpose for initially building the applications and testing it out, and locally running the server and making the applications visible. So this is a quick introduction to how the computer networks work. And next thing is, in the next video we will talk about how to build Django applications using a framework called Learn Django that's available on GitHub. And we'll see you in the next video.